The silence stretched between them like a bridge. Neither was ready to cross, heavy with words that hung in the air unspoken. Tyler Young sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, watching as his roommate Roy Lee moved closer with each passing second. The space that had once felt comfortable between them now crackled with an electricity that made Tyler's heart race in ways he couldn't quite understand. Roy's voice was soft when he finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Do you mind the silence?" he asked, his eyes searching Tyler's face with an intensity that made something deep in Tyler's chest twist and turn. Tyler shook his head slowly, unable to find words as Roy shifted even closer, their knees now touching on the worn fabric of their shared couch. The apartment around them seemed to hold its breath, the familiar sounds of their neighborhood fading into background noise as something fundamental shifted between them. Tyler could feel the warmth radiating from Roy's body, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. His pulse thundered in his ears as Roy's hand moved to rest on the couch between them, fingers spread wide, close enough that Tyler could feel the heat of his palm without actually touching. This was the moment that would change everything, though Tyler didn't know it yet. This was the moment when 2 years of careful friendship, of shared meals and late-night conversations, of Tyler pretending he didn't notice the way Roy's eyes lingered on him sometimes, would finally crack open like an egg, revealing something tender and vulnerable inside. But to understand how they arrived at this moment, how two supposedly straight roommates found themselves on the precipice of something that could destroy or transform their friendship forever, we need to go back to the beginning. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. 3 months earlier, Tyler Young had been convinced he had his life figured out. At 26 years old, he worked as a graphic designer for a small marketing firm, lived in a decent apartment with a roommate who had become his best friend, and had recently ended a 6-month relationship with a woman named Christina Torres that had felt more like going through the motions than actual love. He told himself he was just taking a break from dating, focusing on his career, enjoying the simple pleasure of coming home to someone who understood his need for quiet evenings and good conversation. Roy Lee had been the perfect roommate from the start. They had met through a mutual friend when Tyler needed someone to split the rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in the Arts District. Roy worked as a freelance writer, mostly travel articles and lifestyle pieces for various magazines, which meant he was home often, but never intrusive. He was the kind of person who could sit in comfortable silence for hours, working on his laptop while Tyler sketched or played video games, but who could also launch into passionate discussions about movies, books, or the state of the world when the mood struck. What Tyler hadn't expected was how easy it would be to live with Roy, how naturally they fell into routines that felt more like a partnership than a simple shared living arrangement. Roy made coffee in the mornings, strong and black, the way Tyler liked it. Tyler cooked dinner most evenings, learning Roy's preferences and allergies without being asked. They took turns buying groceries, cleaning the bathroom, and dealing with their perpetually broken dishwasher. More than that, though, they talked, really talked, in a way Tyler had never experienced with any of his previous roommates or even most of his girlfriends. Roy had opinions about everything, but he listened too, asking questions that made Tyler think about his own beliefs and assumptions. They would sit at their small kitchen table after dinner, plates pushed aside, and discuss everything from the ethics of artificial intelligence to whether pineapple belonged on pizza, conversations that could stretch late into the night without either of them noticing the time. It was during one of these conversations, about 6 weeks after Roy moved in, that Tyler first noticed something shifting inside him. They had been talking about relationships, prompted by Roy mentioning a recent breakup with a woman he had been seeing casually. Roy was describing how the relationship had felt hollow, like they were both playing roles they thought they should play rather than being genuine with each other. "I keep thinking there has to be more than this," Roy had said, gesturing vaguely with his coffee mug. "Like I care about her, and the physical stuff was fine, but it felt like I was going through the motions, like I was waiting for something that never came." Tyler had nodded, understanding exactly what Roy meant. He had felt the same way with Christina and with most of the women he had dated. There was always something missing, some spark or connection that he kept expecting to find but never did. "Maybe we're just too picky." Tyler had suggested, but even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. Roy had looked at him then with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much, and Tyler had felt something flutter in his chest, a sensation he couldn't quite name. Maybe, Roy had said quietly, or maybe we're looking in the wrong places. The conversation had stayed with Tyler for days afterward, replaying in his mind at odd moments. There had been something in Roy's tone, in the way he had looked at Tyler when he said those words, that felt significant. But Tyler pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to the intimacy of late-night conversations and the comfort of having found such a good friend. It was easier to ignore the way his pulse quickened when Roy smiled at him, or how he found himself looking forward to their evening talks more than anything else in his day. It was easier to pretend he didn't notice how Roy had started sitting closer to him on the couch during their movie nights, or how their hands sometimes brushed when they both reached for the popcorn bowl at the same time. Tyler had always been good at ignoring inconvenient feelings. He had spent most of his life being the kind of person others described as steady, reliable, uncomplicated. He dated women because that was what was expected, what felt normal and safe. He had never questioned it, never allowed himself to consider that the disconnect he felt in his relationships might stem from something deeper than simple incompatibility. But Roy was making it harder to maintain that careful ignorance. Roy, who laughed at Tyler's terrible jokes and remembered how he liked his eggs cooked and never made him feel like he was too quiet or too serious. Roy, who had a way of looking at him during their conversations that made Tyler feel seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. The first crack in Tyler's carefully constructed understanding of himself came on a Thursday evening in late October. They had been living together for almost 3 months, and their routines had become as natural as breathing. Tyler was cooking pasta while Roy sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, working on an article about sustainable tourism in Costa Rica. Tyler found himself watching Roy as he worked, noting the way he bit his lower lip when he was concentrating, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned forward to type. There was something graceful about the way Roy moved, even in the simple act of reaching for his coffee mug or adjusting his position on the stool. The pasta water was boiling, and Tyler was adding the noodles when Roy suddenly looked up from his laptop and caught Tyler staring. For a moment, neither of them moved, and Tyler felt his cheeks flush with heat that had nothing to do with the steam rising from the pot. "Sorry," Tyler mumbled. Turning back to the stove, "I was just spacing out." But Roy's voice was soft when he responded. "You don't have to apologize for looking at me, Tyler." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that Tyler wasn't ready to examine. He stirred the pasta with more force than necessary, his mind racing. What did that mean? Why had Roy said it like that, with that particular tone that seemed to suggest something Tyler couldn't quite grasp? Dinner was quieter than usual that night, both of them seeming to sense that something had shifted, but neither willing to acknowledge it directly. They ate Roy's favorite penne arrabbiata while discussing Roy's article, but Tyler found it hard to concentrate on the conversation. He kept thinking about the moment in the kitchen, about the way Roy's eyes had held his, about the strange flutter in his chest that seemed to be becoming a permanent fixture. After dinner, they settled on the couch to watch a movie, some thriller Roy had been wanting to see. But Tyler found himself more aware of Roy's presence beside him than of the action on screen. Roy had chosen to sit closer than usual, close enough that Tyler could feel the warmth of his body, could catch hints of his shampoo when Roy moved his head. Halfway through the movie, during a particularly tense scene, Roy's hand landed on Tyler's knee. It was probably meant to be a casual gesture, the kind of unconscious touch that happened between close friends, but Tyler's entire body seemed to come alive at the contact. He could feel the heat of Roy's palm through the fabric of his jeans, could feel each individual finger where they rested against his leg. Roy didn't move his hand away. Tyler sat frozen, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had fallen over them, might force them to acknowledge what was happening and destroy it in the process. His heart was beating so hard he was sure Roy must be able to hear it. But Roy seemed focused on the movie, his hand remaining steady and warm on Tyler's knee. When the credits finally rolled, Roy's hand was still there, and Tyler had spent the better part of 2 hours in a state of hyper-awareness that left him feeling both exhausted and electrically charged. Roy stretched and yawned, his hand finally lifting from Tyler's knee and Tyler immediately missed the contact. "Good movie," Roy said, but his voice sounded slightly strained. And when Tyler glanced at him, he thought he saw something uncertain in Roy's expression. "Yeah," Tyler agreed, though he couldn't have summarized the plot if his life depended on it. "Really good." They went to their separate rooms that night without their usual extended goodnight conversation, and Tyler lay awake for hours trying to make sense of what had happened. It was just a hand on a knee, he told himself. Friends touched each other all the time. It didn't mean anything. But even as he tried to convince himself, Tyler knew something had changed. The careful balance of their friendship had shifted, and there was no going back to the easy ignorance of before. The next few weeks passed in a haze of hyper-awareness and careful avoidance. Tyler found himself paying attention to every interaction with Roy, cataloging each smile, each laugh, each casual touch. He noticed that Roy seemed to be doing the same thing, their conversations taking on an undercurrent of tension that was both exciting and exhausting. They still cooked together, still had their evening talks, still watched movies on the couch. But now every shared moment felt charged with possibility. Heavy with words, neither of them seemed ready to speak. Tyler caught Roy watching him sometimes, the same way Roy had caught Tyler watching him that night in the kitchen. And each time their eyes met, Tyler felt that same flutter in his chest, stronger now and impossible to ignore. Tyler began to understand that what he was feeling wasn't just friendship, wasn't just appreciation for Roy's company and conversation. It was something deeper, something that made him want to reach out and touch Roy's face, made him wonder what it would feel like to kiss him, made him lie awake at night imagining scenarios that both thrilled and terrified him. The realization that he was attracted to Roy, that he might be attracted to men in general, should have been earth-shattering. Tyler had never questioned his sexuality, had never even considered the possibility that he might be anything other than straight. But somehow, with Roy, it felt less like a revelation and more like a recognition of something that had always been there, waiting for the right person to bring it to light. Still, Tyler kept the knowledge to himself, afraid of what it might mean for their friendship, afraid of what it might mean for his understanding of himself. He had built his identity around being the steady, uncomplicated one, the person who knew what he wanted and went after it in straightforward ways. This new awareness of his feelings for Roy felt like stepping into uncharted territory, and Tyler had never been comfortable with uncertainty. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon in mid-November. Tyler had been grocery shopping while Roy worked on a deadline, and he returned to find Roy pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear, his voice tight with frustration. "I understand that, Mom, but I can't just drop everything and come home for another one of Dad's business dinners," Roy was saying. "I have work, I have commitments here." Tyler set the groceries on the kitchen counter as quietly as possible, not wanting to interrupt but unable to help overhearing. Roy's family lived across the country, and from what Tyler had gathered from previous conversations, they had very specific expectations about Roy's life that didn't always align with his own desires. "No, I'm not bringing anyone," Roy continued, his pacing becoming more agitated, "because I'm not seeing anyone right now. And I'm tired of you trying to set me up with daughters of your friends every time I come home." Tyler busied himself putting away groceries, but he could feel the tension radiating from Roy even from the kitchen. When Roy finally ended the call, Tyler heard him sink onto the couch with a heavy sigh. Tyler approached carefully, finding Roy with his head in his hands, shoulders tight with stress. "Everything okay?" Tyler asked softly. Roy looked up, and Tyler was surprised to see genuine distress in his expression. "Family drama," Roy said with a bitter laugh. "My parents want me to come home for Thanksgiving, which would be fine except they've apparently invited the daughter of one of my dad's business partners specifically for me to meet. They're convinced that if they just introduce me to the right woman, I'll settle down and give them grandchildren and become the son they actually want." Tyler sat down on the couch beside Roy, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close as to crowd him. "That sounds incredibly frustrating," Tyler said. Roy scrubbed his hands through his hair, messing up the careful style he usually maintained. "The thing is, Tyler, I don't think I'm ever going to be the son they want. I don't think I'm ever going to meet the right woman, because I don't think the right woman exists for me." Tyler's heart began to race, sensing that they were approaching something significant. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. Roy was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. Then he looked at Tyler with an expression that was both vulnerable and determined. I think I might be gay, Tyler. I think I might have always been gay, and I've just been too scared or too stubborn to admit it. The words hung in the air between them, and Tyler felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. This was it, the moment he had been both hoping for and dreading. Roy had just handed him the opening he had been too afraid to create for himself. How long have you been thinking about this? Tyler asked, his voice carefully neutral. Roy laughed, but there was no humor in it. Honestly, probably my whole life on some level, but more seriously, more consciously, for the past few months. Since I moved in here, actually. Tyler's pulse quickened. Since you moved in here. Roy nodded, his eyes fixed on Tyler's face with an intensity that made Tyler feel exposed. Living with you, being around you every day, it's made me realize things about myself that I've been repeating for years. The way I feel when I'm with you, the way I think about you, it's not how straight men feel about their male roommates. Tyler felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss that was both terrifying and exhilarating. This was his chance to be honest, to admit his own feelings, to see if the connection he had been sensing was real. But the words stuck in his throat. Years of conditioning and fear making it impossible to speak. What are you saying? Tyler finally managed to ask. Roy's expression softened, and he shifted closer on the couch, close enough that Tyler could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. I'm saying that I think I'm falling for you, Tyler. I'm saying that every time I look at you, I want things I've never wanted before. I'm saying that the reason none of my relationships with women have worked is because I've been comparing them all to how I feel when I'm with you. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to respond, wanted to tell Roy that he felt the same way, that he had been having the same realizations, the same longings. But the fear was still there. The voice in his head that said this was too much, too fast, too dangerous. Roy seemed to sense his hesitation, and his expression grew uncertain. I'm sorry, Roy said quietly. I shouldn't have said that. I don't want to make things weird between us. I needed you to know. No, Tyler said quickly, reaching out instinctively to grab Roy's hand before he could pull away. Don't apologize, I'm glad you told me. Roy's hand was warm in his, and Tyler realized this was the first time they had held hands. The first time they had touched with clear intention rather than casual contact. It felt monumental, like crossing a line they couldn't uncross. Tyler, Roy said softly, and Tyler loved the way his name sounded in Roy's voice, gentle and questioning and full of hope. I need time to think, Tyler said, and he saw something like disappointment flash across Roy's features before Roy nodded and squeezed his hand. Of course, Roy said, take all the time you need. But even as Tyler said the words, he knew he didn't really need time to think. He knew what he felt, knew what he wanted. What he needed was courage, and that was something that couldn't be rushed or forced. That night, they maintained their usual routines, but with an undercurrent of awareness that made everything feel different. They cooked dinner together, but Tyler found himself hyper-conscious of every moment when their bodies came close, every accidental brush of hands or shoulders. They watched television, but Tyler could barely concentrate on the screen, too aware of Roy beside him, of the careful distance Roy was maintaining between them now. When they said goodnight, Roy paused at Tyler's bedroom door, and for a moment, Tyler thought he might say something else, might push the conversation further. But Roy just smiled, soft and understanding, and disappeared into his own room. Tyler lay awake that night, replaying Roy's words over and over. I think I'm falling for you. The phrase echoed in his mind, and each repetition made something warm and bright expand in his chest. Roy was falling for him. Roy, who was funny and intelligent and kind, who made Tyler feel more like himself than anyone else ever had, was falling for him. And Tyler was falling too, had been falling for months without really understanding what was happening. The disconnect he had always felt in his relationships with women suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't been looking in the wrong places, as Roy had suggested that night months ago. He had been looking for the wrong people entirely. The next morning, Tyler woke with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. He knew what he wanted, knew what he felt, and he was tired of being afraid. Roy was in the kitchen when Tyler emerged from his room, making coffee and toast, the same morning routine they had shared for months. But when Roy looked up and smiled at him, Tyler saw something new in his expression, a careful hopefulness that made Tyler's heart ache. "Good morning," Roy said, and his voice was gentle, giving Tyler space to set the tone for their interaction. "Good morning," Tyler replied, and then, before he could lose his nerve, he added, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday." Roy went very still, his hand frozen halfway to the coffee pot. And I think I've been falling for you too," Tyler said, the words coming out in a rush. "I think I've been falling for you since almost the beginning. I just didn't understand what it was. I've never felt this way about anyone before, man or woman, and it scared me, but I'm tired of being scared." Roy set down the coffee pot and turned to face Tyler fully, and Tyler could see the hope blooming in his expression. "Really?" Roy asked softly. "Really," Tyler confirmed, taking a step closer. "I don't know what this makes me, what it means about my sexuality or my identity or anything else. But I know how I feel about you, and I know I don't want to keep pretending I don't." Roy closed the distance between them then, reaching up to cup Tyler's face in his hands. "Tyler," he said, and Tyler could hear the wonder in his voice. "Tyler, are you sure?" "I'm sure," Tyler said, and he was. He had never been more sure of anything in his life. Roy's thumb brushed across Tyler's cheekbone, and Tyler leaned into the touch, marveling at how right it felt, how natural. "I've wanted to touch you like this for so long," Roy whispered. Tyler's breath hitched. "How long?" "Months," Roy admitted. "Since that night we were talking about relationships, when you said maybe we were looking in the wrong places. I kept thinking about what the right place might be, and every time I tried to imagine it, I saw you." Tyler felt something break open in his chest, something warm and bright and overwhelming. He had spent so many years feeling disconnected, feeling like he was going through the motions of a life that didn't quite fit. But this, standing in their kitchen, with Roy's hands on his face and Roy's eyes looking at him like he was something precious, this felt like coming home. "Can I kiss you?" Roy asked, and Tyler's heart nearly stopped at the question. "Please," Tyler whispered, and then Roy's lips were on his, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid the other might pull away. But when Tyler responded, when he brought his hands up to rest on Roy's waist and pulled him closer, the kiss deepened, became more certain. Tyler had been kissed before, many times, but nothing had ever felt like this. This was like finding a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Roy rested his forehead against Tyler's. "Wow," Roy whispered. "Yeah," Tyler agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "Wow." They stood there for a long moment, just breathing each other in, and Tyler felt like the world had shifted around them, like everything was different now in the best possible way. "What happens now?" Tyler asked softly. Roy smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile Tyler had ever seen. "Now we figure it out together," Roy said. "One day at a time," Tyler nodded, feeling a sense of rightness settle into his bones. He thought about all the relationships he had been in before, all the times he had felt like he was performing a role rather than being himself. With Roy, he didn't have to perform. He could just be Tyler, and that was enough. They spent the rest of that morning talking, sitting at their kitchen table with forgotten coffee growing cold between them. They talked about their fears, their hopes, their complete lack of experience with same-sex relationships. They talked about what it might mean for their families, their friends, their understanding of themselves. Tyler admitted that he had never even considered he might be attracted to men before Roy, and Roy confessed that he had been questioning his sexuality for years, but had never had the courage to explore it. They were both terrified and exhilarated, both completely out of their depth and somehow certain that they were exactly where they needed to be. "I don't know how to do this," Tyler said at one point, gesturing between them. "I don't know how to be in a relationship with a man." Roy reached across the table and took his hand. "I don't either," Roy said, "but I know how to be in a relationship with you, Tyler. The gender stuff, we'll figure out as we go. But this feels right." Tyler squeezed Roy's hand, marveling at how perfectly their fingers fit together. "It does feel right," he agreed. "Scary, but right." They decided to take things slow, to give themselves time to adjust to this new dynamic between them. But slow, Tyler quickly discovered, was a relative term when you were living with the person you were falling in love with. Every interaction was charged with new meaning, every casual touch now loaded with intention and possibility. Roy was incredibly patient with Tyler's uncertainty, never pushing for more than Tyler was ready to give. But Tyler found that his comfort level was expanding faster than he had expected. Holding hands felt natural almost immediately. Kissing became a regular part of their routine. Soft good morning kisses and deeper good night kisses that left Tyler's head spinning. The first time Roy slept in Tyler's bed, it was because Roy had fallen asleep on the couch during a movie and Tyler hadn't wanted to wake him. Tyler had carried him to his own room, and when Roy woke up in the middle of the night, confused and disoriented, Tyler had invited him to stay. They had slept curled together, Roy's head on Tyler's chest, and Tyler had woken feeling more rested than he had in years. After that, they began spending most nights together, sometimes in Tyler's room, sometimes in Roy's. They would lie in bed talking until late into the night, sharing stories from their past, dreams for their future, fears and hopes and everything in between. Tyler learned that Roy had always felt different from his family, had always felt like he was disappointing them in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Roy learned that Tyler had spent most of his life feeling like he was sleepwalking through his own existence, going through the motions without ever feeling truly alive. But with each other, they both felt awake, felt present in a way neither had experienced before. 3 weeks after their first kiss, they were lying in Tyler's bed on a Sunday morning, the late November sunlight filtering through the curtains and casting everything in a golden glow. Roy was tracing patterns on Tyler's chest, and Tyler was playing with Roy's hair, and everything felt perfect and peaceful and right. "I love you," Roy said suddenly, quietly, and Tyler's heart stopped for a moment before beginning to race. Tyler looked down at Roy, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the fear of rejection warring with the need to be honest. "I love you too," Tyler said, and he meant it completely, felt it in every cell of his body. Roy's face lit up with a smile that was brighter than the sunlight streaming through their window. "Really, really," Tyler confirmed, leaning down to kiss him softly. "I love you, Roy Lee, and I can't believe it took me this long to figure it out." The conversation about telling other people came up naturally a few days later. They were cooking dinner together, moving around their kitchen with the easy synchronization they had developed over months of cohabitation, when Roy mentioned that his sister had called earlier asking about his plans for Thanksgiving. "I told her I might not come home this year," Roy said, stirring the sauce while Tyler chopped vegetables. "I said I had something important here that I didn't want to leave." Tyler paused in his chopping, looking over at Roy. "What did she say?" Roy smiled. "She asked if I was finally going to introduce her to the mysterious roommate I'm always talking about. Apparently I mention you a lot when we talk." Tyler felt warmth spread through his chest. "You talk about me to your sister." "All the time," Roy admitted. "She's been curious about you for months. I think she suspected something was going on between us before I did." Tyler considered this, thinking about his own family, his parents who lived a few hours away, and who he saw regularly for holidays and birthdays. He had always been close with them, had never hidden anything significant from them before. The thought of telling them about Roy was terrifying, but the thought of hiding this relationship felt worse. "I want to tell my parents," Tyler said suddenly, surprising himself with the declaration. Roy looked at him with wide eyes. "Are you sure? We don't have to rush into anything." "I'm sure," Tyler said, and he was. "This isn't something I want to hide, Roy. You're not something I want to hide. I love you and I want the people who matter to me to know that." Roy set down his spoon and crossed to Tyler, wrapping his arms around him from behind. "I love you too," Roy murmured against Tyler's ear. "And I want to tell people too. I'm just scared." Tyler leaned back against Roy's chest, drawing comfort from his warmth and solidity. "I'm scared too," Tyler admitted. "But I'm more scared of pretending this isn't real, of acting like you don't mean everything to me." They decided to start with their closest friends, people they trusted to be supportive and understanding. Tyler called his best friend from college, a woman named Sharon Phillips, who had known him since they were 18 and who had always been completely accepting of everyone in her life. Sharon's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Tyler, that's amazing," Sharon said over the phone, and Tyler could hear the genuine happiness in her voice. "I always wondered if you might be, not entirely straight." You never seemed that into any of the women you dated. But this Roy guy, you sound different when you talk about him. You sound happy. I am happy, Tyler said, looking across the room at Roy, who was pretending to read but was clearly listening to Tyler's conversation. Happier than I've ever been. Roy's experience telling his sister was similarly positive. She apparently squealed with excitement and immediately demanded to know when she could meet Tyler properly. Roy's parents would be more challenging, he knew, but his sister's support gave him hope that not everyone in his family would reject this new version of his life. The first real test came when Tyler's parents invited him for dinner the following weekend. Tyler had been planning to tell them about Roy for days, rehearsing different versions of the conversation in his mind. But when the moment actually came, sitting around his childhood dining room table, the words felt impossible to say. His mother was asking about his job, his father was complaining about the weather, and everything felt so normal and familiar that Tyler couldn't figure out how to introduce the fact that his entire understanding of himself had shifted. How did you tell your parents that you were in love with your male roommate when you had never given them any indication that you might be anything other than straight? It was his mother who finally opened the door for him. You seem different lately, Tyler, she said, studying his face with the perceptive gaze that had always made him feel like she could see straight through him. Happier, more settled. Is there someone special in your life? Tyler's heart began to race and he felt his palms grow sweaty. There is someone, he said carefully. Someone very special. His parents both looked at him expectantly, and Tyler took a deep breath, gathering his courage. His name is Roy, Tyler said, and he watched his parents' expressions carefully for their reaction. His mother blinked in surprise, but her expression remained open and curious. His father's face went through a series of micro-expressions that Tyler couldn't quite read. Roy, his mother repeated slowly. Your roommate, Roy. Yes, Tyler said. We're together now in a relationship. I love him, and he loves me. The silence that followed felt eternal, and Tyler's heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for his parents to process this information. Finally, his mother reached across the table and took his hand. Are you happy? She asked simply. Tyler nodded, feeling tears prick at his eyes. Happier than I've ever been. Then I'm happy for you, his mother said firmly. I want to meet him properly. This Roy who's made my son so happy. Tyler's father was quieter, clearly struggling to adjust his understanding of his son, but he eventually nodded and said, if he makes you happy, then he's welcome in our family. Tyler cried on the drive home, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. Roy was waiting for him when he got back to their apartment, anxious to hear how the conversation had gone, and Tyler fell into his arms and told him everything. They're going to love you, Tyler said against Roy's neck, just like I do. The weeks that followed were a blur of introductions and adjustments, of coming out conversations and family dinners, and the gradual integration of their relationship into their existing social circles. Most of their friends were supportive, and Tyler's parents quickly warmed to Roy, charmed by his wit and intelligence, and obvious devotion to their son. Roy's family was more challenging. His parents struggled with the news, and there were several difficult phone conversations that left Roy drained and upset. But his sister remained firmly in their corner, and gradually, slowly, his parents began to come around. It would be a long process, Roy knew, but Tyler's unwavering support made it bearable. Christmas came and went in a whirlwind of family visits and gift exchanges. Tyler gave Roy a leather-bound journal for his writing, and Roy gave Tyler a vintage camera he had been coveting for months. They spent Christmas Eve with Tyler's family and Christmas Day alone together, cooking an elaborate meal and exchanging quiet promises about their future. By January, their relationship had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They had moved all of Roy's clothes into Tyler's room, officially making Tyler's bedroom their bedroom. They had joint bank accounts and shared responsibilities in a 5-year plan that included travel and career goals and possibly adopting a dog. Tyler had never imagined that love could feel like this, so easy and comfortable and right. He had always thought relationships required constant work and compromise. But with Roy, everything just fit. They challenged each other intellectually, supported each other emotionally, and made each other laugh every single day. The physical aspect of their relationship had developed gradually, naturally, without pressure or expectations. They were both learning, both figuring out what they liked and what worked for them, but the emotional connection they shared made everything else feel like a natural extension of their bond. On a cold evening in February, they were curled up on their couch, Roy reading while Tyler sketched, when Roy suddenly looked up from his book and said, "I can't imagine my life without you anymore." Tyler set down his pencil and looked at Roy, seeing something serious and contemplative in his expression. "Good," Tyler said softly, "because I can't imagine mine without you either." Roy closed his book and shifted closer to Tyler on the couch. "I know we haven't been together very long," Roy said, "and I know we're both still figuring out a lot of things about ourselves and about this. But Tyler, I want you to know that this isn't temporary for me. You're not temporary for me." Tyler felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You're not temporary for me either," Tyler said. "You're everything, Roy. You're my future." Roy smiled and Tyler could see tears gathering in his eyes. "I love you so much," Roy whispered. "I love you too," Tyler replied, pulling Roy closer until they were pressed together from shoulder to hip. "Forever if you'll have me." "Forever sounds perfect," Roy said. And then he was kissing Tyler, soft and sweet and full of promise. As they sat there together, wrapped in each other's arms in the apartment that had become their home, Tyler thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been convinced he understood himself, convinced he knew what his life would look like. He had been wrong about almost everything, but he had never been happier to be wrong. Roy had changed everything, had opened doors in Tyler's understanding of himself that Tyler hadn't even known existed. But more than that, Roy had shown Tyler what it felt like to be truly known, truly accepted, truly loved for exactly who he was. The silence that had once stretched between them like a bridge they were afraid to cross had become a comfortable companion, filled now with understanding and acceptance and love. Tyler no longer minded the silence because he knew that Roy would always be there to fill it, to move closer, to remind Tyler that he was no longer alone. And in the quiet of their shared apartment, with Roy's heart beating steadily against his chest and Roy's breath warm against his neck, Tyler finally understood what home felt like. Spring arrived slowly that year, creeping in through their windows in the form of longer days and warmer breezes. Tyler and Roy had been together for 6 months now, and their relationship had deepened and strengthened with each passing day. They had weathered the initial challenges of coming out, had navigated the complexities of their family's reactions, and had settled into a life together that felt both exciting and stable. Tyler's work was going well, and he had recently been promoted to senior designer at his firm. Roy's writing career was flourishing too, with several major publications picking up his pieces and a potential book deal on the horizon. They were both pursuing their individual dreams while building something beautiful together, and Tyler had never felt more balanced or fulfilled. One evening in April, they were walking home from dinner at their favorite restaurant, hands linked, talking about their plans for the weekend, when Roy suddenly stopped walking and turned to face Tyler. "Tyler," Roy said, and there was something in his voice that made Tyler's heart skip a beat. "What is it?" Tyler asked, searching Roy's face for clues about what he was thinking. Roy took both of Tyler's hands in his, right there on the sidewalk under the streetlights, and Tyler could see that Roy was nervous about something. "Tyler, you know I love you, right?" Roy said. "Of course I know that," Tyler replied, confused by the question. "I love you too." "What's going on, Roy?" Roy took a deep breath, and Tyler could see him gathering his courage for something. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," Roy said. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to travel the world with you and build a home with you and grow old with you." Tyler's heart began to race as he realized where this conversation was heading. "Roy, I know we're young," Roy continued, his words coming faster now. "I know we haven't been together very long in the grand scheme of things. But Tyler, I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of my love for you. You are my person, my partner, my best friend, my everything." Tyler felt tears beginning to gather in his eyes as Roy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Tyler Young," Roy said, dropping to one knee right there on the sidewalk. "Will you marry me?" Tyler stared down at Roy, at this man who had changed his entire life, who had shown him what love could really be, who had helped him discover parts of himself he had never known existed. The ring in the box was simple and beautiful, a white gold band that caught the light from the street lamps and sparkled like a promise. Yes, Tyler whispered, and then louder, yes, Roy, of course, yes. Roy's face broke into the biggest smile Tyler had ever seen, and he stood up and swept Tyler into his arms, spinning him around right there on the sidewalk while Tyler laughed and cried and held on tight. When Roy finally set him down, he slipped the ring onto Tyler's finger, and Tyler marveled at how right it felt, how perfectly it fit, how it seemed to complete something he hadn't realized was incomplete. I love you so much, Tyler said, cupping Roy's face in his hands. I can't believe you're going to be my husband. Husband, Roy repeated like he was testing out the word. I like the sound of that. They walked the rest of the way home in a daze, stopping every few steps to kiss, to look at the ring, to marvel at the fact that they were engaged. Tyler kept looking down at his hand, at the physical symbol of their commitment, and feeling overwhelmed with happiness. When they got back to their apartment, they called their families and friends to share the news. Tyler's parents were thrilled, immediately beginning to plan an engagement party. Roy's sister screamed with excitement over the phone, and even Roy's parents seemed genuinely happy for them, their acceptance of their son's relationship having grown stronger over the past months. That night, they lay in bed talking about their future, about wedding plans and honeymoon destinations, and all the adventures they wanted to have together. Tyler thought about how far he had come from the confused, disconnected person he had been a year ago, and he felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this moment. I never thought I could be this happy, Tyler said softly, his head resting on Roy's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Roy's arms tightened around him. Neither did I, Roy replied. But Tyler, this is just the beginning. We have our whole lives ahead of us. Tyler smiled, thinking about all the tomorrows stretching out before them, all the mornings they would wake up together, all the evenings they would come home to each other. The future felt bright and full of possibility, and Tyler couldn't wait to experience all of it with Roy by his side. The months leading up to their wedding were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. They decided on a small ceremony in Tyler's parents' backyard, surrounded by their closest family and friends. Roy's parents flew in from across the country, and Tyler was touched to see how much effort they were making to embrace their son's happiness. Tyler had worried about the logistics of planning a same-sex wedding, but their families and friends rallied around them with enthusiasm and support. Tyler's mother took charge of the flowers and decorations, Roy's sister designed their invitations, and their friends organized everything from the bachelor parties to the catering. The night before the wedding, Tyler lay awake in his childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. Tomorrow, he would marry Roy Lee, the man who had changed his entire understanding of love and happiness and himself. Tyler thought about that first night when Roy had asked if he minded the silence, when Roy had moved closer and started the chain of events that led to this moment. He thought about their first kiss in the kitchen, their first I love yous, their first fight and their first makeup. He thought about all the small moments that had built their relationship, all the conversations and touches and shared experiences that had woven their lives together. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect weather that felt like a blessing. Tyler got ready with his groomsmen, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his tie and tried to calm his nerves. He wasn't nervous about marrying Roy. He was nervous about the ceremony itself, about standing in front of all their loved ones and making such public declarations of love. But when the music started and Tyler walked down the aisle to where Roy was waiting, all his nerves disappeared. Roy looked incredible in his dark suit, his hair perfectly styled, his eyes bright with tears and joy. When their eyes met, Tyler felt the same flutter in his chest that he had felt that first night in the kitchen, the same sense of broness and belonging. The ceremony was beautiful and personal, with vows they had written themselves and readings from their favorite books. When the officiant pronounced them married and told them they could kiss, Tyler felt like his heart might burst with happiness. Roy's kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Tyler could hear their friends and family cheering around them. The reception was a joyful celebration, filled with dancing and laughter and heartfelt toasts. Tyler's father gave a speech about how proud he was of his son for finding true love, and Roy's sister told embarrassing stories about Roy's childhood that had everyone in stitches. But Tyler's favorite moment came late in the evening when he and Roy snuck away from the party for a few minutes alone. They stood in Tyler's parents' garden, still in their wedding suits, holding each other close under the stars. "We did it," Roy said softly. "We're married." "We're married," Tyler repeated, still amazed by the reality of it. Mr. Lopez Young. They had decided to hyphenate their last names, creating something new that belonged to both of them. It felt symbolic of their entire relationship, the way they had each brought their individual selves to create something stronger and more beautiful together. "I love you, husband," Tyler said, testing out the new title. "I love you too, husband," Roy replied, and they both laughed at how strange and wonderful the words sounded. They danced their first dance as a married couple to the song they had chosen together, a slow ballad about finding your person and never letting go. Tyler held Roy close and thought about all the dances they would share in the years to come, all the anniversaries and celebrations and quiet moments they would have together. Their honeymoon was a 2-week trip to Europe, something they had been planning and saving for since their engagement. They visited Paris and Rome and Barcelona, exploring museums and cafes and hidden neighborhoods, taking countless photos and making memories that would last a lifetime. Tyler loved watching Roy experience new places, loved seeing his excitement and curiosity, and the way he seemed to absorb every detail for future stories. Roy loved Tyler's artistic eye, the way he could find beauty in unexpected places and capture it in his sketches and photographs. They spent their days wandering and exploring, and their evenings in cozy restaurants and hotel rooms, talking and laughing and marveling at the fact that they were married, that they had found each other, that their love story had led them to this perfect moment. On their last night in Barcelona, they sat on their hotel balcony overlooking the Mediterranean, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "This has been the most perfect 2 weeks of my life," Tyler said, leaning against Roy's shoulder. "Mine too," Roy agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of Tyler's head. "But you know what I'm most excited about." "What?" Tyler asked. "Going home," Roy said, "starting our real married life together, figuring out what comes next." Tyler smiled, thinking about their apartment waiting for them, about the life they would build together day by day. The honeymoon had been magical, but Roy was right. The real adventure was just beginning. When they returned home, they settled back into their routines with the easy comfort of a couple who truly belonged together. Tyler went back to work, Roy continued writing, and they began to plan their future with the confidence of two people who knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. They talked about buying a house someday, about traveling more, about the possibility of children through adoption or surrogacy. They talked about growing old together, about all the anniversaries they would celebrate, about the legacy of love they wanted to leave behind. One evening, exactly 1 year after Roy had first asked Tyler if he minded the silence, they found themselves in the same positions on their couch where it had all begun. Tyler was reading while Roy worked on his laptop, and the comfortable quiet between them felt like coming full circle. "Do you mind the silence?" Roy asked suddenly, echoing his words from that first night. And Tyler looked up to find Roy watching him with the same intensity he had shown a year ago. Tyler smiled, remembering how nervous and confused he had been that night, how afraid he had been of what he was feeling. "Not when you're here to fill with it," Tyler replied. Roy closed his laptop and moved closer, just as he had that night. But now there was no hesitation, no fear of crossing lines or ruining their friendship. Now there was only love and certainty, and the beautiful life they had built together. Roy kissed him softly, and Tyler thought about how much had changed since that first moment of awareness, that first flutter of attraction that had seemed so terrifying at the time. Now that same flutter felt like coming home, like the most natural thing in the world. "I love our silence," Tyler murmured against Roy's lips. "I love everything about us." "Me too," Roy said. "Our whole beautiful, complicated, perfect story." They held each other close in the quiet of their apartment, in the space where their love story had begun, and Tyler felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. The silence between them was no longer something to be afraid of or filled with nervous energy. It was comfortable and peaceful and full of love, a testament to how well they knew each other, how completely they belonged together. And as they sat there in the gentle quiet of their shared life, Tyler understood that sometimes the most beautiful love stories began not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with simple questions asked in moments of vulnerability. Sometimes love began with someone asking if you minded the silence, and then moving closer to fill it with something even more beautiful than words. Years passed, and their love story continued to unfold in countless small moments in major milestones. They bought a house with a garden where they could grow vegetables and host dinner parties for their friends and family. Roy published his book, a collection of travel essays that became a modest bestseller, and Tyler opened his own design studio, building a client base of small businesses and nonprofits whose missions he believed in. They adopted a golden retriever named Charlie, who became the center of their universe, spoiled and loved beyond measure. They traveled to new countries and explored new cities, always together, always discovering new things about each other and the world around them. They weathered challenges too, as all couples do. There were arguments about money and career decisions, periods of stress when work demanded too much of their time and attention, moments when they had to consciously choose their relationship over easier paths. But through it all, they remained committed to each other, to the love they had found and nurtured and protected. On their fifth wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows in the same garden where they had first been married, surrounded by the same loved ones, plus a few new additions, friends' children, and Roy's new nephew, and Tyler's cousin, who had come out the year before, and credited Tyler and Roy's example with giving him the courage to live authentically. Tyler looked around at all the faces watching them with love and support, at Roy's parents who had become genuinely fond of him over the years, at his own parents who treated Roy like the son they had always wanted. He thought about how their love had rippled outward, touching other lives, creating space for other people to be brave and honest about who they were. But mostly he looked at Roy, at the man who had asked if he minded the silence all those years ago, and then filled it with a love more beautiful than Tyler had ever imagined possible. Roy's hair was a little longer now, with threads of silver at the temples that Tyler loved to trace with his fingers. His face was more lined, marked by years of laughter and concentration, and the thousand expressions Tyler had memorized and cherished. When they kissed to seal their renewed vows, Tyler felt the same flutter in his chest that he had felt that first night, the same sense of wonder and gratitude and overwhelming love. Some things he realized never changed, never diminished, never lost their power to take his breath away. That night, they lay in bed in their house. Charlie sprawled across the foot of the bed despite their attempts to train him otherwise, and talked about their future the way they always had. They were considering adopting a child, had started the process of applications and home studies and interviews. They talked about what kind of parents they wanted to be, what values they wanted to pass on, what kind of world they wanted to help create for the next generation. "I still can't believe this is my life," Tyler said softly, his head resting on Roy's chest, listening to the heartbeat that had become the soundtrack of his existence. Roy's hand stroked through Tyler's hair, a gesture so familiar and comforting that Tyler felt himself relaxing into sleep. "I know what you mean," Roy replied. "Sometimes I think about that night when I asked if you minded the silence, and I can't believe how brave I was. I was terrified you would say yes, that you would ask me to leave you alone." Tyler smiled against Roy's chest. "I was terrified too," he admitted. "Terrified of what I was feeling, of what it meant, of how much I wanted you to keep moving closer." "I'm glad we were both brave," Roy said. "I'm glad we chose love over fear." "Me too," Tyler agreed, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. As he drifted off to sleep in Roy's arms, Tyler thought about all the silences they had shared over the years, comfortable and peaceful, and full of understanding. He thought about all the ways Roy had filled those silences, with words and touches and presence and love. He thought about the family they were building, the legacy they were creating, the love story they were still writing together one day at a time. The silence between them now was perfect, complete, full of all the love they had shared and all the love they had yet to discover. It was the silence of two people who had found their home in each other, who had learned that sometimes the most profound communication happened without words at all. And in that perfect silence, surrounded by love and possibility and the promise of all their tomorrows together, Tyler Young Lopez fell asleep next to his husband, grateful beyond measure for the question that had started it all, for the courage they had both found to move closer, and for the beautiful life they had built in the space between silence and love.